For the longest time, we've been told that real, rock-solid truth has to come from a lab, right? Or maybe a university or a peer-reviewed journal. But what if we've actually had that sequence backward this whole time? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into this absolutely fascinating premise, the idea that your body is actually doing the heavy lifting of knowledge long before the academic world ever takes notes. We're going to bridge that gap between deep intuitive wisdom and the hard clinical science that's, well, finally catching up to it. Okay, let's dive into this core thesis we're anchoring on today. Quote, "The Academy doesn't originate these ideas. It ratifies them after the body has already done the heavy lifting." Just think about that for a second. The really profound human insights, the stuff we rely on for resilience, for meaning, for connection, they so often start right in the body, through ritual, through somatic experience. Academic institutions, they don't invent these truths. They just observe them, put them in neat little categories and stamp approved on them long after everyday communities have literally been living them out. Now, what's really interesting here is how this exact dynamic plays out in the wild. There was this highly engaged social media thread recently, and one comment just triggered this massive visceral response. It said, "The body knew, the Academy forgot. Now the body is teaching again." This right here is what we call poetic compression. It's an emotional hook. It completely bypasses our standard intellectual defenses, right? It doesn't bog you down in science. It just evokes a truth that instantly feels right to our nervous systems. And honestly, that resonance, that's the very first step in how real knowledge actually spreads. Which brings us to a pretty critical question. Is science finally catching up to your intuition? Because let's be real, we so often dismiss our gut feelings as just being irrational or silly. But today, we're taking that poetic internet philosophy and connecting it directly to the hard science of our nervous systems. I mean, what actually happens when your quote-unquote intuition becomes a measurable physiological metric? Section 1, the Cartesian anomaly. To really get how we temporarily lost touch with our bodies, we have to look at the contrast between these two worldviews. On one side, we have modernity. Think the 17th century Cartesian split. René Descartes basically championed this super rigid separation between the thinking mind and the physical body. But then, look at the other side, pre-modern or relational epistemology. For almost all of human history, cultures didn't see knowledge as just abstract thought. It was an ongoing, active dialogue between the body, the environment, and the people around us. So this whole mind-body split, it isn't the baseline of human understanding at all. Actually, it's a total historical anomaly. And this brilliantly illustrates that idea of relational epistemology. You've got this classical bust, representing traditional knowledge, but it's completely intersected by these glowing conceptual neural pathways. It's such a perfect visual cue. It shows us that knowledge doesn't just happen inside an isolated skull. No way. True knowledge emerges in the spaces between our bodies, our environments, and our relationships. We are literally always in dialogue with the world. Section 2, Science of Interoceptive Accuracy. So how do we actually prove that the body is the primary site of cognition? Enter interoceptive accuracy, or IAC for short. Based on the widely cited framework from Garfinkel and colleagues, this is basically your objective ability to detect internal bodily signals. We're talking heartbeats, breathing patterns, visceral sensations, the whole shebang. The Academy has basically taken this lofty, abstract idea of intuition and grounded it into a hard, measurable, physiological dimension. Intuition isn't magic, guys. It's literally your brain's ability to accurately read the data that your body is constantly gathering. Let's move to and see how this builds into a real interactive process in a clinical setting. Take the famous heartbeat counting task, developed by Chandri back in 1981. It's fascinating. Step 1, you just sit silently, no feeling your pulse, nothing. Step 2, you count your internal heartbeats over a set time interval, relying purely on what you feel inside. And step 3, researchers compare your reported count to an actual ECG recording. Just like that, this simple methodology turns a completely subjective feeling into an objective, quantifiable score. It's pretty wild. So what does this all mean when you actually score highly on that test? Well, the research is incredibly validating. Higher interoceptive accuracy links directly to better intuitive decision-making, especially when you're faced with really complex choices. It also leads to enhanced emotional granularity. Basically, that means you can process your feelings with a lot more precision. And this perfectly aligns with neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis, which argues that our physical reactions are absolutely crucial in guiding our reasoning. So yeah, the Academy is essentially proving that paying attention to your gut literally makes you smarter. Section 3, the cycle of knowledge. Now that we've dug into the clinical science, how do these body-level truths actually spread through our cultural networks? Think about this four-step epistemic validation cycle. Step one is poetic compression. An insight starts as a short, punchy, resonant phrase. Step two is public resonance. It goes viral, right? Because it feels viscerally true to people's nervous systems. Then comes step three, analytic expansion. This is where academic commentators step in and start adding clinical terms like interceptive accuracy. And finally, step four, redistributed narrative. The insight cycles back into the public sphere, but now it's wearing you armor of institutional legitimacy. And it's fascinating to see this exact historical cycle mapped out. For instance, ancient Greek myths, they didn't start out as rigid philosophy. They started as sung poetry and physical embodied ritual. It was only centuries later that philosophers came along and turned them into formal metaphysics. Same thing with Zen koans. They hit the West first as counterculture poetry, way before they became the subject of fMRI mindfulness studies. The actual medium through which these ideas travel completely proves the argument. Let's synthesize this historical data for a second. If you look at the origins, where the body knew first, compared to the academic ratification later on, the pattern is undeniable. Greek myths become formal metaphysics. Zen koans become fMRI science. And that modern wave of embodied cognition, that began in somatic therapy and dance long before anyone was getting peer-reviewed citations for it. It just reinforces our core takeaway here. The body constantly originates truth, and the academy simply unpacks it and cites it later. So the crucial point is that seeing the pattern is the beginning of choice. Once you recognize this overarching pattern of epistemic propagation, once you realize that institutional science is basically just trailing behind somatic wisdom, you are empowered. You don't have to wait around for some white paper to tell you what your nervous system is already screaming at you, right? Recognizing this empowers you to trust your own integrated body-level awareness right now. I want to leave you with a lingering existential question today. The next time you feel a true body-level instinct, will you wait for the academy to ratify it? Now, we don't need to reject scholarship, obviously, but we desperately need to reintegrate our nervous systems with our cognition. From this day forward, when your body signals a truth, maybe through a quickened pulse or just a sudden flash of intuition, remember that you carry a primary intelligence right inside you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to start paying close attention to what your body is trying to teach you today.